Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rod Goy. I'm Dean of BCIT School of Construction and the Environment. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and some new people as well today. BCIT is proud to co-sponsor this panel session with the Vancouver Regional Construction Association and Construction Business Magazine. We work closely with our industry partners to ensure our programs meet industry needs and standards and provide our students with job-ready skills. We are not only the largest training institution in British Columbia, largest trades training institution in British Columbia, but we also work very hard as the leader in providing quality education. We offer practical career credentials designed for the workplace, including certificates, diplomas, degrees, and now a master's degree in engineering, trades and apprenticeship programs, and much more. Now, before I introduce our moderator, I'd like to remind everybody to turn the ringers off of your handheld devices. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, a good friend and colleague, not to mention an accomplished golfer. And he's very modest about it too, I might add. He came up to me this morning at the breakfast and he said, "Don't you dare say anything about my golfing." Keith Sashaw, President of the Vancouver Regional Construction Association. Keith Sashaw was appointed the President of the VRCA in 2001. As President, Keith oversees the largest construction association in BC, representing participants in the non-wood frame construction industry in the Lower Mainland Southwest region of BC. Prior to VRCA, Keith served as the Executive Vice President of the Electrical Contractors Association of British Columbia and as the Executive Vice President of the Canadian Home Builders Association of BC. In both organizations, he was responsible for the operations of industry associations at the provincial level. Keith has been an active member in other areas, serving on numerous boards and advisory committees for organizations such as BCIT, the Construction Cluster for the Building Opportunities with Business Organization, the BCCA Group Benefits Plan, and many others. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please welcome Keith Sashaw.
Great. Nope. Thanks very much. Thanks, Rod. When it comes to golf, I have much to be modest about, that's for sure. So it's a great opportunity. Buildex asked a few years ago if I had any ideas about a session for Buildex, and I said, you know what I'd really like to do is get four or five of the most interesting people I know in the construction industry and just have a chat and a conversation about some of the trends and some of the issues facing the industry. In previous conversations, we've talked about kind of the here and the now and what's happening in the current state of the industry. This year, I think we're going to be taking a different approach in terms of trying to take a look at some of the trends that are going to be impacting the industry, especially in British Columbia, and how it's going to be impacting and kind of what to watch for. And I think we've got a fabulous panel here in terms of bringing a range of different perspectives and viewpoints. On my left is Roger Bayley. Roger is one of the foremost design managers in British Columbia, in Canada, and his work is around the world. He was the design manager behind the Olympic Village, and he's certainly very embraces innovation and new technologies. Sitting next to Roger is Mark Casaletto. Mark is the Managing Director of Reed Construction Data Canada. And in that capacity, he has his fingers on the pulse of what's going on in the construction industry. He's tied in with Reed Construction in the United States, and he's an astute observer in terms of some of the large macroeconomic trends that are impacting the industry. Next to Mark is Sarah Clark. She's the head of the Partnerships BC, and Sarah will be bringing with her, bringing her perspectives in terms of some of the changes that are going on in the procurement side, some of the concerns and some of the views of owners and others in terms of conceiving ideas, conceiving projects, and moving them forward. Next to Sarah is Dee Miller, and Dee is with us in two capacities. She's one of the principals of JJM Construction, one of the foremost road building companies in British Columbia. But this last year, she's done an absolutely fantastic job of chairing the Canadian Construction Association. And as such, I think Dee can bring with her kind of a perspective on some of the challenges that are facing construction associations in the industry across Canada. And last but certainly not least is Don Nishimura. He's President and Chief Operating Officer of Scott Construction Group, and he's 3 weeks into the chair of the Board of Directors for the Vancouver Regional Construction Association. And Don has got a lot of experience in a number of different construction methods and certainly a keen observer in terms of what's going on. So what I want to do is just set the stage for the conversation, and there's a number of trends that I see impacting the construction industry, and to some degree they're all interrelated, and they all have an impact one way or another. And then we'll be asking each of the panelists for their observations and any other trends, and then we'll be getting into a conversation about what this all means for you people in the audience. We're always challenged for time on this. We'd like to allow some time for some questions and answers at the end of the session, so that you people who have questions to ask of this panel can put the big posing questions, and we can continue that discussion. Following the presentation, there is a reception immediately outside. It's a hosted reception to which, of course, everybody is invited, and the conversation can begin or can continue on with a glass of wine and some refreshments. So taking a look at the trends that I see in terms of that are going to be having an impact on the construction industry as we move forward is the first one, skill shortages. I think the downturn in October of 2008 only allayed the concerns around skill shortages for a brief period. When one takes a look at the demographics and what's going on in the construction industry, we're going to be facing some skill shortages in the construction industry that will make 2007 and 2008 look like a cakewalk. We're already beginning to see skill shortages in the trades, but also in the areas of the estimators, the project supervisors, and site superintendents. Another issue that's certainly going to be impacting everything we do as we move forward are the environmental and sustainable practices. And what does that mean for owners, general contractors, trade contractors? How does the industry adapt to those changing technologies? What are the opportunities, and how do we move forward in terms of dealing with these issues around sustainable practices? And again, related to that are new technologies and processes, and I see it related very much to the skill shortages and the sustainable practices. At a skill shortage conference a few years ago, I heard one of the panelists say that the first response to skill shortages was called the Industrial Revolution. So we're going to be having to take a look at the new technologies. How can we be incorporating new technologies and processes, and what impact is that going to have on contractors, manufacturers, and suppliers? Certainly in BC, what we've seen as the rest of the world almost disintegrates in the economic maelstrom that's happened after October of 2008 is we've seen increasing global competition. I've often told the story. About 6 months ago, I was in my office and I received 2 phone calls on one day. The first phone call was from a fellow. He was with Turner Construction. He has been a member of VRCA for a year, but he wanted to meet to discuss how to get involved with the association and to find out what the trends are in BC. While I was Googling Turner Construction, where I found that Turner Construction is the largest construction company in the United States with $9 billion worth of revenues in 2010, I got another phone call from Bouygues Construction. They're already in the Vancouver market as a JV and a P3 project, but they also wanted to find out how to become a general contractor and how they're going to be taking advantage or get involved with the Vancouver market. Bouygues is the largest construction company in France, 32 billion euros of revenue in 2010. So clearly the BC market is seen as appealing to international and multinational players, and how does the industry respond to some of those challenges? And finally, in terms of, as we heard Michael Campbell talk about at this morning's CEO breakfast. We're going to be moving into a challenging fiscal environment, both for public, for the private sector, but increasingly for the public sector as well. So how do we deal with these challenging fiscal environments, and how do these above trends that I've talked about impact this? So maybe, Roger, if you just want to give us a little thought in terms of you've got a lot of background and experience in new technologies, processes, sustainable practices, and the general way in which construction is done. What are your thoughts?
I think you, when you mailed out your email to us, you asked what keeps us up at night. So I was trying to figure that out, and I thought that praying for BC Hydro to increase our electricity rates would probably serve my sustainable industry best, simply because yesterday I was meeting with an individual talking about energy costs in Europe, and those are about 4 times what they are here. And yet the commitment, I think, that we have as an industry towards how our built space serves our communities really is going to hinge on the innovation and approaches that we take to resource management and resource consumption, and how that affects the kind of lifestyles that we all have. And the problem that I see constantly is trying to bring the industry around to the point where it recognizes that it's not just the front-end cost of a project, but it is the long-term management and operation of a project. And there's this gulf across which somehow we're not very good at stepping in order to understand what front-end investment means in terms of operational value at a later time. So somehow the industry has to make that shift, and I think it brings with it responses to all of the issues you're talking about. You know, as we see new technology come into place, can we see that technology moving from the construction in the field to the construction in a plant, so that we're bringing more pre-manufactured product into the marketplace? How do we initiate those kinds of approaches to components being added into the development of a project? How do we deal with approaches to more global management of energy resources and that are consumed in the operation of a project? There's a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of need, I think, in the industry for education around these issues. And I've spent a lot of time in the last year and a half, 2 years, speaking in public around how these issues were dealt with at the Olympic Village, what was successful, what wasn't successful. And we're actually coming up to a moment in time now, I think, where there's enough statistical information that's about to come out of the operation of the Olympic Village that will really give us some guidance about what it is that could work in the future in terms of sustainable development and sustainable community initiatives. And I think that's going to be a huge value to us all as we really get a sense of how the initiatives that the City of Vancouver took actually have played out in the field, and give some direction to how those initiatives actually continue to go forward.
Excellent. Good points. Life cycle costing, all of those aspects that factor into some long-term trends and issues. Mark, what's the perspective from your part of the world?
You know what? One of the things that we've been talking a lot about across Canada, and for that matter the United States, is it's really exciting. It's a really exciting time to be in the Canadian construction industry, building and design industry. If you point to the fact that PricewaterhouseCoopers and Oxford Economics did a study where they annually rank the largest construction output by country every year. So Canada has historically been, for as long as we can remember, 9th or 10th in the world in terms of size of construction in this country. Over the next 10 years, we're projecting, we agree with them, that Canada is going to move into the top 4, only behind China, India, and the United States in terms of size of construction industry. And I think the reason that's happening, there's a lot of reasons, and we'll talk about it when we get into the discussion, but I think it plays into a lot of what we talk about, because a growth of that magnitude over that period of time is going to put a lot of strain on the labor force. It's not just about short, it's about movement of labor. And really, you have to understand what's driving that. I mean, the resource sector is playing a large role in it. Canada, as Michael Campbell said this morning, is very well positioned. We have a very strong brand in the world. We're a resource-rich nation in a world that never has demanded resources more. And it's having a huge impact across Canada, and especially in this part of the country. And I think when you start to get into the micro discussion, you start to understand why these topics are of issue in Canada, because some of them have been around for a while. Some of them are being more exaggerated now because of the fact that the construction industry, the design industry in Canada is a growth industry. So with that comes huge opportunity, but also comes more pressure.
Good, thanks. Sarah, as head of Partnerships BC, some of these issues that Roger and Mark talked about in terms of lifestyle or life cycle costing, all of those issues, that's got to be a big part of your mandate as a head of the Partnerships BC.
So life cycle, looking at the life cycle issues around an asset, I would have to say we always incorporate that into any type of procurement analysis, or even just at the basic analysis of whether you're going to build a facility or not. And I can say that's been much more over the last part of this last decade. In fact, it was even hard to find people that knew how to price that because people were so much focused on the capital that they weren't looking at the long term. And two things have happened as a result of that. Now when we're looking at public asset, we are looking at the long-term life cycle cost of those. We're considering, well, the province went to LEED's Gold for one thing. We're considering energy efficiency. And as a result of that, the procurements are being shaped around those considerations, and the contractors and designers that are bidding on those are asked to respond to that. And when you're asked to respond to something, you can do it if you know what the owner wants. And the other thing that's come out of that, so we've had some really great response to that and innovative responses to building design. But the other thing that's come out of it is when in the projects that have a 30-year contract, like some of the highway projects, some of the hospital projects, when the designers and constructors get together with the operator maintainers and they look at what should we build up front, how are we going to manage the life cycle down the road, you get a much different result in the design. It can be quite interesting in how, when that whole piece is looked at, what kind of different designs. An example on Sea to Sky Highway is there were a number of the bridges that the province thought they would rehabilitate. But the winning bid actually replaced them, because over the 30 years, it was better to have replaced them up front than to spend the time rehabbing them over that time, and they were still the most economical bid. On the LEED side, I think it was pretty challenging on the hospital, like how are we going to incorporate that, and our original estimates for the projects went up to incorporate the LEED's requirements, and I think that the delta now that we're putting into that is quite a bit lower because people have figured out how to respond to that and how they can do that cost effectively as a result of experience. So it's fairly positive in all manner.
Excellent. So moving on to Dee and Don, you guys they're the ones that make it happen. The general contractors, the ones that take some of these grand trends and put it into operation. And Dee, with your experience as chair of CCA, you've talked to contractors across the country. What are you hearing?
I think you identified the challenges that the industry is recognizing today, and number one across Canada is certainly skills, labor, skilled worker shortages today, but we see the future coming between now and 2020. In British Columbia, we may not recognize, because I think it's first time that I can recall, where right across Canada, our industry is experiencing growth numbers, big, massive projects, and projected projects. So, for example, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador never been busier, and they used to be the supply source for labor, as for instance to Northern Alberta. Well, they need their workers at home, and their workers want to stay at home. Nova Scotia, of course, was successful with one of the big shipbuilding contracts from the federal government, and so they also are experiencing labor shortages. Quebec has a plan to spend, I think, think it's $85 billion in the next 10 years for the Quebec Plan Nord. Again, huge shortages. Alberta, they're projecting to open up the oil and gas, Saskatchewan with potash, oil and gas, and of course British Columbia. I think I heard from Roz at a recent BCCA meeting that they're projecting something in the order of $34 billion in northern British Columbia for projects. So for the first time ever, I agree with Mark, it's a wonderful time to be in Canada and to be in our industry, and but we have to recognize that there are huge shifts. We have spent the last couple of decades enjoying prosperity within our industry, working in a, for the most part, an urban environment. Our workers were able to stay close to home. Often they're two-income families, right? Well, now when you see the projects that are coming onto the planning table, you see that it's going to be a shift. Now, I remember back in my husband and our career, and where we had to travel to northern BC and work in Dees Lake and Williams Lake and up in the area of the north. That's where the work was. But that area hasn't been as robust. And now, so we're not only looking at the whole of Canada requiring workers, but it's going to, we're going to have to look at how we're going to recruit and train and retain in northern communities or more remote communities, because it's being driven, for the most part, in the northern part of Canada. That's a big shift. And I know there aren't necessarily adequate training facilities to handle the training needs up in those areas, remote areas. So it's quite a demographic shift that we, in my generation, we have never known, not the same.
Thank you. Don, from a Vancouver-based construction company?
Well, certainly the panel has identified many of the issues at heart: innovation, different project delivery formats, labor shortages. Certainly from my perspective, labor shortages are one of the key areas, and it's exacerbated by many things. We've all heard of demographics and those kind of changes happening, the fact that Canada is busy across nationally. But so much of what we do in terms of our expectations of project managers and superintendents and even tradespeople is experiential learned. It doesn't come very quickly, so there's a whole ramp-up term, there's a learning curve. And having not invested in that in years past, I think we're paying for it now, so there's a huge demand for that. I was talking to a candidate the other day and who was running a business, and he was commenting that, what kind of superintendents are you looking for now? Because it has huge challenges. In the old days, we used to talk about having guys that came up through the trades, through the ranks. But if you look at the oncoming technology and the differences in project delivery, we don't do things, or we're not going to be doing things the way we've always done them. He's asking for superintendents to have degrees that can operate a computer, that know about BIM or integrated project delivery, or it isn't always the traditional way we've always done it before. So those kinds of things are going to put even more pressure on labor shortages.
That's very interesting, Don. You mentioned BIM, and when one looks at the productivity of the construction worker, productivity is relatively low when one looks at the construction industry relative to some of the other sectors. In Michael Campbell's presentation this morning, he talked about the fiscal challenges, and in a telephone conversation earlier, we talked somewhat about the fiscal challenges around what we're going to be doing, and we can't always be looking to government to solve some of these issues. So I just want to ask the panel, how do we inculcate a sense of innovation and training and enhancements in terms of trying to increase the productivity and take a look in terms of instilling that innovation in Canada's workforce? I mean, Roger, you've come up with some very innovative products and implementation of new design techniques. What's the role of the architect and the design manager and others in terms of spurring this culture of innovation?
Well, it certainly is a very a complex challenge. And I remember when we introduced the notion of radiant heating and cooling in our ceilings, and still today people come up to me and say, Roger, but hot air rises, and you know, they can't even get the concept that, you know, the sunshine is radiant energy. And so you're trying to convey different approaches and different ways of dealing with technology. And I would go onto the site of the Olympic Village, and the contractors would look at me and they'd say, Roger, you know, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. It's never, ever going to work. You know, where did you come up with this idea? And of course, this has been, technology had been in Germany for about 25 years. And after they got to about the third floor and they realized they were making a lot of money actually installing these kinds of systems, they were wondering where the next job was coming from, right? But, you know, it's about that educational process and having people around who are prepared to provide the leadership. And that, I think, is probably the biggest problem we have. Where are our leaders and those who are prepared to take risks and prepared to push the envelope forward? Because it's become such a complex arena, both from the legal point of view and just from the knowledge point of view, to actually step up to the front edge and take the risk and move forward, right, in a very constructive way. How do we do that? You know, the best I can see for how to do this is by education, by inspiring people, by conveying the experiences that we've had, and trying to demonstrate that those experiences actually resulted in a constructive pathway forward. And you know what you're doing with your group, you're beginning to recognize, you know, that this long-term thinking is really what we have to think about. But the part of the problem is, you know, it depends on what part of the industry you're in. If you're in the condominium business, you know, a developer is building a product, he's selling a product, and he's gone. And so the relationship between operational issues and capital front-end issues, that gap is huge, right? And how do you bridge it? How do I demonstrate to a developer that if he builds a better product that is more energy efficient, that the buyer will pay more for, right? And will the buyer pay more for it, that he gets value? I have to actually make that connection from you know, the finished product back to the design table. And that's where the difficulty, I think, lies.
So, good point, Roger. And in terms of getting the innovations out and all of those, Mark, as read construction data, you have all sorts of resources in terms of the Journal of Commerce, Daily Commercial News, all of these aspects. You're doing some very innovative stuff on video and how do you get that innovation out to the people on the job site, the owners, the architects, the contractors, the manufacturers and suppliers?
Well, I think whether you're building a building, designing a building, or supplying information to an industry, you can't stand still. Standing still is death, really. Corporations and businesses are living, breathing things. They need to move. They need to evolve. They need to grow. And in this day and age, I mean, I believe in our industry. Just hearing, we interact with hundreds of thousands of people a day through various forms. We're very fortunate to kind of have a pulse of what's going on, and we do a lot of research around costing. And it's a very interesting thing happening in Canada. Since 1990. Pretty much up till 1990, the consumer price index, inflation, and the construction cost index, the cost to build something, was pretty much in line. And that's really what you want to see in any industry. But since 1990, we started to see separation. Construction costs are rising faster and are much more volatile than the cost of living for all of us. And when you start to see that in any industry, it starts to suggest that you have a productivity issue in the industry. When you think of that, and you think, okay, well, companies are facing a lot of strains on margins, we're becoming less productive as an industry, you start to develop an environment for innovation. I think what puts that on steroids is competition. The fact that we're talking about foreign competition, the fact that we're talking about large consortiums that are coming to this country, they're going to bring very innovative ways to do things. And it's, I think fundamentally, and I would argue probably more than any point in the history of the Canadian construction and design industry, we have a very ripe environment for innovation because you have competition, unlike we've never really faced before, and you have a productivity issue that's obvious and growing. So you have an environment for innovation, and building information modeling and designing, the idea of designing a building in 3D is a great example of something that the industry is looking at very closely. So.
Sarah, talking about global entities coming in and consortiums and innovation and what some of those large groups are bringing, what are you seeing from Partnerships BC perspective?
We are seeing a lot of interest from international companies coming to Canada because of the construction program that is here. As Dee has outlined, it's enormous. Canada's a good place to work. There's good credit rating in Canada. There's good contracts. Canadians are fair people. So, all the things are ripe to have a good environment for competition. They understand, not only people that compete on projects most of the time here understand how to win when they're competing on a project. What's interesting to me is that most of the competition, the foreign interest that's come in, a lot of them have set up offices here, have partnered locally, and there's a skill transfer going on, which, back to the need for innovation, but also it's making people here in BC or companies here in BC and Canada desirable outside of Canada. So it's a shift where Canada's being looked at now in a shortage around the world of where are we going to get, other countries are looking for capacity and they're looking for Canadian designers, Canadian construction companies, Canadian investors. So there's a number of companies based in BC, whether it be in the design industry or in investments or in construction, they're taking their expertise around the world. PCL is a good example. Just won a contract for a large hospital in Australia. There's other examples. A Plenary Group that's here as an investment a company that invests in construction projects. Their North American head office is here. That means they're working on projects not only here, Ontario, New York. So there's a definite transfer of knowledge and skills, but also demand.
Excellent. Dee, are you seeing that from the Canadian Construction Association's perspective? The Canadian Construction Association does awesome work around international opportunities, and tied in with that, what's your perspective?
More and more we're seeing mergers and acquisitions. You mentioned Turner went into Edmonton, bought Clark Builders, but they're actually owned by Hochtief. Yeah. And throughout so I mean, it's hard to know.
It's hard to keep up with.
It's hard to keep up with who's on first and who owns whom, because there's so much movement going on. As Sarah mentioned, PCL was successful in Australia, but we had Jeff Smith, who is the CEO for one of the large Canadian firms, and Ellistone, and he spoke at the Construction Industry Leaders Forum that CCA hosts in Toronto, and did a fabulous presentation. And he said, look out, we're coming, we're going to compete with every one of you in every discipline, in every sector, because as the multinationals come into our market, they lose their market share, so now they've got to look at exporting or moving into other provinces where they have not been. There's known that a Quebec company who's very, very large used to just pretty well operate in Quebec, and now they're major. They're doing $1 billion in the Maritimes. So, as I'm traveling across, it's where a year ago, I'll say back further, 2-3 years ago, this movement of 3Ps and foreign entities coming in. Some of our executive members on the CCA board said it is never going to be mainstream. It is never going to be a big trend, or a changing trend. And in British Columbia, and I think Sarah and her department maybe can be credited with it, but BC is viewed as a leader in the world in the 3P marketplace. And I know BC Hydro's gone out recruiting foreign interest to come into British Columbia to bid on the hydro work. So I think we've gone out as a province and aggressively marketed. Our industry maybe doesn't like it, but it's a proven fact that productivity improves when you bring in foreign investment and foreign experience. I mean, we just have to learn how to hold on to our share of the market or go find new share of market. And so we have to be ready to change, and the only thing constant is going to be change.
Don, what's your perspectives on the global competition and what's happening in the marketplace?
Well, I think Sarah and Mark and they also make very valid points. It's been a topic of discussion, especially if I were to put my chair of the VRCA Board of Directors hat on, in terms of these posing challenges for small to medium contractors. But realistically, I don't think you can adopt the protectionist attitude at the expense of innovation and productivity and access to capital and growth and development. I could speak for our company, which is a small to medium-sized company. I'm never going to be and acknowledge the PCL in terms of P3s, but I am involved in P3 pursuits, and I think you have to be creative and you have to learn. You find tuck-in positions where I don't mind working as a subcontractor or forming alliances or joint ventures with other parties to partake. So I think we have to learn new ways of participating. If there's one theme that's kind of common amongst this panel here, that's that the wind's a changer here. The world is changing, not only in project delivery methods, but the kind of projects that are happening, the size of projects, who's participating. So, I don't know, I often quote Jack Welch to my guys in the office about if the rate of change outside the organization exceeds that within, then the end is in sight. So I think that's very true.
Very good point. And one of the areas I want to touch on is, it was mentioned earlier in the panel, is building information modeling and in terms of innovation. And I mean, not only is it a spur to innovation and the added complexity, but it's going to change the way in which construction operates. I mean, you have to have greater collaboration at the front end of a project in terms of effective utilization of BIM. So maybe we'll reverse order on this. But Don, in terms of
gosh, collaboration, what an innovative thought. More productivity, better drawings. Again, that'll pose challenges for people who think that we want to go back to the traditional methods of project delivery, which is the design, bid, build. Technology is coming, and things like email and things make people less productive. There's just information overload. You're right, but it's absolutely true. It's just, and it's information. It's not productive. So BIM is coming. We're participating in a small way. I think if you want to call it innovation, if you want to call it a different way, spend time now rather than pay now or pay later. So BIM sometimes, not always, is partnered up with things like integrated project delivery. Those two concepts are going to change the way we procure, and it is challenges for people in construction associations, for small and medium contractors, for people who have thought that this is always the way we've done it before. But I think we better embrace it. I know that Dee and CCA are hopping on and have set up a BIM council. So I'm looking forward to the things that CCA can do with regards to BIM.
Perfect segue. Dee, on the CCA and the BIM council.
CCA has been very, very active in BIM, and they've taken a collaborative approach and have pulled together the architects, the engineers, owners groups such as National Defense, DCC, some other public entities at the federal level, and the Institute is really taking an approach where it's not focused on the software companies that are selling BIM, but the actual technology of how it will help. And there's a website set up, they've done a business plan, they've done an environmental scan of where it's at, and so they're making some pretty substantive gains in the area of understanding BIM as a process, not a software system, but the actual the process of planning and designing and building, and they've brought together all the stakeholders as groups, and they're working collaboratively, which I think is very, very good.
How's BIM influencing your
It's
operation?
not in a big way. I have to say we haven't been interfaced with it a lot yet, but I'm sure that's coming.
Keith, if I could just comment, we met with the AGC, American General Contractors, in the fall, and it surprised me, the states we always follow, right? But in the states, certainly for the ICI sector, widely embraced. BIM is as is LEED. I mean, they seem to be ahead of the curve. What shocked me is they're saying that for the horizontal, the road building community, which is probably a little more, you've probably done more 3Ps around, I wouldn't know that, but
about equal.
About equal. But what surprised me is AGC said that BIM is a reality for the horizontal community also, which I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I know, that's a trend.
And Sarah, you say you haven't seen much, and yet, you know, a lot of the large P3 projects are hospitals, which I would have assumed would have had high utilization of BIM.
And maybe they have. I mean, I'm not in the weed. I did come from the road science and transportation. But I mean, what we do see in each of the accommodations projects as well as the road projects, a lot of innovation around the design of the building and the systems that are in it. And that's, I think, one of the great benefits of having that constructor-led or designer-constructor team responding to what the owner's objectives are. And, you know, it's very important, and I know everybody on this has worked with owners that have a broad idea of what they want, but when you actually sit down and get them focused, that's the most important part, to get their priorities focused, and then the contractors or bidders can respond to that. And I love when I can say this as an engineer, because I am an engineer, but I love when you're been working on a project for a couple of years and the engineers and the team say, there's never going to be any other thing proposed, because we've been working on this, and then every proposal that comes in is innovative in some manner, right? And that's just having those different sets of eyes and expertise, looking at the base design that, you know, the basic design that was already done, and that's been a great benefit to the province and has changed the way that even the province thinks about their base designs for the next project. Though, you know, those innovations that have come in have become now incorporated as their basic approach. It's fantastic to see.
Mark, I think you were one of the first ones to talk about BIM at some of the conferences I've been attending, and certainly Reed Construction Data has been at the forefront of this.
Yeah, you know, building information modeling to me is, you know, we sit on a lot of information. We always look back to understand what's going to happen in the future. And the one thing that amuses me about building information modeling as an innovation is, you know, over the years there's been a lot of resistance to this, because I just don't understand it, you know, especially when you start to think at the contractor level. Like, a lot of the smaller contractors resist it. You know, it's a lot of technology, it's expensive. But the fact of the matter is they were saying the same things at the time LEED was coming to the forefront. There was a lot of resistance to LEED. It's a fad, it's not a trend. Being a certified LEED contractor is not something I need to worry about now. The fact of the matter is, like in any industry, like in any major innovative shift, there's always resistance to it, because I don't really understand it. But the fact of the matter is, we design planes in 3D, we design cars in 3D. It makes even more sense to design a building in 3D, because, you know, the life cycle of a building is much longer and much more pronounced than a plane or a car. So the ability to design it in 3D, see how it interacts with this environment, and I'm kind of stepping out of my element here, but the reality is you know, we talk about life cycle costing and efficiencies. Well, BIM plays into that. We talk about sustainability and building buildings with less of a footprint. Well, you know, that technology kind of allows you to do that more efficiently, notwithstanding the general efficiencies and the millions of dollars that could be saved just in the process itself. So, from our perspective, BIM is not something that is just coming through. It's gonna take hold. I think we're just still trying to figure it out.
Roger, as a design manager, and
well, you know, my first experience with BIM was in 1976, when a group from Oxford University came down and showed me a BIM program, right? And said, "Oh, great, you've got to do this, Roger." And I looked at it and I said, there isn't a smart enough person in my architectural practice or in my consulting practice who could at least even begin to understand what you're talking about, right? And be able to manage that level of information. And it's almost the same feeling I have about the computer world, and you talked about emails a moment ago. You know, the Olympic Village, I got 200 emails a day, of which 199 were simply passing the responsibility to the next person, right? and I'm almost as cynical about the application of computer graphics, because there was a moment in time when we all actually used to see the drawings that people were drawing, and we could go and comment on them and have something to say about it, and then the computers came along, and now you never see a drawing until they print it, and now you find out that it's a load of rubbish, right? You know, it's not coordinated, it's not connected, it's not functional. And you know, like in 25 years of managing an architectural firm, I don't think I ever woke up feeling content that, you know, the computers were really helping, right? I mean, I hate to say that, but getting people to really understand how buildings go together. And the industry really suffered because there was a moment in time when we had one of those wonderful downturns. We lost all of the middle technical people in our industry. And so we ended up with people at the top who had been around for a long time, who are now at the top and actually don't do anything except be at the top. And then we have all these young kids who came in with all their sort of technology that really wasn't well developed, and you're missing this piece in the middle. And so the quality of the documentation that went into the marketplace, I think, has just been steadily declining. And I think that's also encumbered by the fact that the industry has consistently and without question tried to reduce the fees paid to the design profession. So what we've seen now is design fees going down and down and down and down, and the time allocation to resolving problems which have become more and more complicated has diminished. And I think that's where the really key problem lies. You are not paying, the industry is not paying its professionals a sufficient amount of money to actually work out the problems and come up with the innovative solutions that are required. So a consultant, in a mechanical engineering firm or an electrical engineering firm is pulling open the drawer from last week and pulling out the ones he did for John and selling them to Robert, right? And changing the name on the bottom. And so innovation is simply not occurring because there are not the fees available to process that kind of information. And I think that's consistent.
We haven't heard that around our board table, have we, Don?
No. Construction documents.
The quality of drawings.
But think about it. If this is a solution or a potential solution to an age-old problem, how long have we been complaining about construction documents?
Forever.
Forever, right? So let's stop pointing fingers at people and worrying about it. Let's get the guys that are involved in coming up with a better mousetrap. Right? If I'm buying a car, I don't talk to the guy that designed it. I'm going to talk to the mechanic if I want to figure out a problem.
But what's the answer to that issue, right? Like how do we actually get that professional group to produce a better and more competent document?
Over there yet?
I was surprised because I was at a meeting a week ago Tuesday. I happened to be chairing it. It was the Construction Industries Consultative Committee. And that's a committee made up of the engineers, the architects, top board chair, as well as the president of the association. So architects, engineers, again, the owners group, as well as the construction documents, specifications people, and CCDC. And guess what came up about construction documents being incomplete, inaccurate, and it was actually the Engineering Society that said, why don't once and for all we all put this on our agenda and we begin to address it. So there you go.
It's going to be driven by an owner who's going to demand something better, and that better mousetrap may be building information.
Or that the better mousetrap is more cost effective for the building team because it's
in the long run
from mistakes.
I think you have to speak up a little. Can everybody hear, Sarah? Or,
well, I mean, I think the point you were making before about competition coming in, I mean, some of these large-scale international firms have a slightly different approach to some of these issues, and I think they'll scoop that work away from the industry.
Well, we're working with the University of BC Civil Engineering Department right now on working with the grad students and PhD students on the applications of BIM and 3D. Well, everybody's familiar with 3D, right? Sales tool, crash detection, but you're looking at BIM for 4D, 5D, 6D, life cycle costing. Great application. I think that's where the real value of them is going to come in.
Roger mentions some of the multinationals coming in. In my conversation with Bouygues, they shared their business model as they come in and they bid on a project, they get a project, they immediately ship the plans and specifications to Paris, where they're reviewed by the design consultants and others in Paris and the leading experts. They go out to their global supply chain in terms of sourcing all of the materials that go into the product and then ship it back to Vancouver or BC or wherever the project is. So I think that's what you're talking about, Roger, in terms of that application, in terms of getting that global global access. And the fellow from Bouygues was saying, you know, there are opportunities for the Vancouver or the BC companies in terms of if you have a product and you get into that supply chain, it broadens it out. But you know, how does that impact? You know, I guess I'm looking at Dee and Don in terms of those kinds of support mechanisms for some of these multinationals. How do you feel about those kinds of issues?
You know, most of our projects we're procuring worldwide anyway. It's not something new with international consortiums coming in or anything like that. I mean, China's a big source of product right now. I mean, whether it's stone or curtain wall or furnishings, whatever. I mean, if you look at cost, we were procuring curtain wall from China. It was cheaper for the curtain wall sealed units to come out of Texas, go across the water, and then come back again as an assembled product. I tried to waylay the product from Texas to set up a production facility in Vancouver. No, they wouldn't have it. It was cheaper for them to, well, I know cheaper, but more effective for them to cross the pond twice. Now, if oil hits $200 a barrel, that may change, but you know, that's the world.
Yeah, I mean, all the glass from the Olympic Village went to Korea and came back.
Yeah, a couple times, didn't it?
So, Mark, any thoughts in terms of some of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we raise an important point here. We often think of foreign competition and how it's affecting the contractors, the general contractors, and even the designers in some cases. But you know, a lot of our customers are building product manufacturers, and they're feeling it as well. I mean, architect will specify typical this or equivalent typical North American-based manufacturer, and the consortium will come in and say, I have a global contract with a company in China that can supply the same product and meet all the requirements for half the price, a third of the price. And so the impacts of this is right across the board. We're seeing, I mean, our entire industry, the entire everybody supplying the product, building, designing, is impacted by this. It's a challenge.
It's a challenge, and when you take a look at you know, the membership of CCA and VRCA, I think I heard a statistic in one of the morning sessions, 80% of our members have fewer than 20 employees. Small entrepreneurial operations, small to medium-sized enterprises. So just want to ask the panel, if you're a small contractor, small volume contractor, 20 or fewer employees, you've got BIM, you've got some of these issues, you've got the global competitions, you've got lead, you've got these changing requirements. How do you play the game? Roger.
Well, I think the thing that I'm seeing at the moment, and I find it really quite interesting because for the last year I've been working for a large electrical trade contractor here, the largest one in Western Canada, and now I'm working with a couple of trade contractors, one who does energy measurement and management and another who supplies energy systems. So these are trade groups, and they're all coming to me to say, how do we change from being a trade supplier bidding in a competitive way, how do we change from that model to being a provider of knowledge? We have knowledge. We have a lot of experience. We have a lot of understanding of how this works in the field. How do we get from being at the bottom of the pile up to the top of the pile so we can actually start giving reasoned and useful advice and become a preferred supplier? So there's three trade groups, all who are very interested in moving essentially their market, right, from scraping around at the bottom of the pile, bidding against others, and then making their money on extras, to turning themselves into a professional contributor to the overall development of a project through the sharing of knowledge. Right? And so there's three good examples: one in mechanical engineering, one in energy, and one in electrical. And that's what they're doing.
And our statistics that we have on the projects that we have would say that BC is doing a good job in keeping up in that. If you look at the different projects, you can see the percentage that's being subcontracted out. So you may have a larger construction company that comes in, but they're usually partnered locally at the general level, and the subcontractors are 90% BC based. So that, to me, and you're the stats man here, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that to us shows that BC companies are being successful in maintaining supply and services on these projects. they're not being told, there's not this conversation sort of makes it sound like you're always being left behind and out of work, but.
No, you're right, and but there are opportunities. And
yep.
so, a word that's come out several times during this conversation is change and adaptability. I think Roger was moving towards value added in terms of how do you move from a commodity base to a value added service.
Yeah, they're trying to take a more service-oriented approach to bring that knowledge forward at a time when it can impact the decisions that are made in a more integrated and collaborative manner. And that really is, leadership, collaboration, integration. Those are the three words that, if we can bring those words together, then we're going to actually solve a lot of these problems.
Mark, any?
Yeah, I mean, I've had this discussion on numerous occasions, and I think in an environment like this, no matter who you are, no matter how big you are, it's a time where you have to open your mind. This is a time where you think about, can we partner? What can we learn from other companies? Can we, Dee, at the CCA conference last year, one of the big themes is, as an industry and the companies in the industry, we should look around the world. We should take our expertise to other parts of the world. I was talking to a contractor this morning, and the size of his business was maybe, he would be considered a small contractor. He's doing more work in China. He said, I'd rather be working here. He said, but I've opened my mind, and I'm doing more work in China than I ever imagined I would. And he said, I never thought 2 years ago that I would, but I'm doing more work in China, and for good reason. I mean, what's going on in China from a construction standpoint is really epic, and there's opportunities there. So I think, I guess the message that I give is open your mind. What you consider being impossible is not necessarily impossible. A small contractor in Toronto had a few relationships, successful business. The dynamics of that economy are changing. He's now doing more business in Western Canada, specifically British Columbia, and this is a very small contractor than he ever has before. So, you have to think outside the box in cases like this, and you have to, the world is changing under your feet, and you got to move. So, Dee?
I want to stress that even though there's this movement and change and different procurement methods, there's still going to be traditional work to do within the public sector. The municipalities are still, they have their procurement people, they work in the schools, the community centers, and I think they tend to be very open to keeping their local trades and local contractors busy. And then there's the provincial government and, of course, the federal government. There's still funding, and CCA has a wonderful opportunity to participate in the three-level of government's plan to build the Canada Building Plan replacement for the current funding stream that ends in 2014. And so there's still going to be public procurement that is going to be let, for a large part, in the traditional manner at all levels of government. And communities are conscious of supporting their local community-based contracting firms. I mean, I heard it when I was in Kelowna last week. So not that they protect, but they're very sensitive that these are their local people, their local community who support them, who contribute, who are involved. So everything isn't going to go 3P. Everything isn't going to go to these new procurement ways.
What the history to date has shown in most jurisdictions, whether it be here in the United Kingdom or other countries around the world, it's less than 20%
I've heard that.
of the spend, and that's been consistent here. And if you look at BC across the last 5 years, that's about $4 to $5 billion that's being spent a year in traditional procurements and a lot of those very small projects. So it's a tool in the toolbox. And as you say, there's probably going to be more and more different types of tools as people do search for innovation, because as you pointed out, I think owners are looking for their dollars to do different things, and they're looking for the expertise from the constructors and the designers to bring that in. But there is all different types of procurement and contracting that suit all different types of projects.
Don, any thoughts on this?
I don't take issue with P3s or different project delivery formats, but I think as chair of a construction association, it does pose real challenges if, as Roger says, you're looking at a value proposition. You know, a lot of us in the business want to differentiate ourselves from our competition and say, well, I don't want you to commoditize what I do, but realistically, it's a difficult balancing act, you know, because if you bring value assessments and propositions into it, you really are challenged to go look at, you know, the low price kind of model. And I'm not sure that always gets you what you want, but how do you balance that off against, you know, equal access for all requirements on publicly funded projects? So those are things that we're going to have to deal with. I mean, I don't think we can stick our head in the sand and say, well, you know, I don't want to look at P3s, don't want to look at this IPD, don't want to look at them. They're coming. I think we're going to have to learn how to deal with them.
So we'll be opening up the floor to questions. So if you have any questions, there's 2 microphones in the middle. So feel free. We'll continue the discussion. So one of the things I noticed with the decline in October of 2008 and the collapse of the financial market, one of the things that I noticed was a collapse of the silos. This is more on the contracting side, but prior to then, I think that people had nice little niches. They were single-family home builders or multi-family home builders, or they did hospitals, or they did strip malls, and they did all of those kinds of things. Now, with the collapse, as a result of that, the silos are down. We have people pursuing opportunities in different sectors. Some they're not familiar with in the sectors. It's led to a lot of intense competition. Mark, have you seen any thoughts of this?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the ideology that I think businesses, whether they're small businesses or very large multinationals, they're living, breathing organisms, and they have survival instincts. And when the financial markets crashed and people got very afraid, and let's face it, more than ever, fear drives behavior now, especially when it comes to the economy. You start to think, okay, well, how do I keep my business moving forward in an environment like this? Well, you start to branch out. I mean, you got home builders moving into the ICI sector, or vice versa. You see, you know, mergers and acquisitions happening at a more rapid pace, because at the end of the day, I believe businesses are living, breathing organisms. They have survival instincts, and any business worth their salt is thinking about doing things differently in tough economic times. You just don't stand still, because typically you get run over. So
it all comes full circle around to, you know, you're looking at what does Scott have that other companies don't. It comes down to what kind of individuals you have within the organization, the entrepreneurs as well as the people that deliver, and that goes right back into the skills shortage and the issue with quality, and how do you train those people?
Faster.
Faster, but also
that's the problem, right?
and exposure. You know, you can't sit in a design office all your life and understand what the stresses and strains are in the field and what the results are of you making mistakes or not understanding what that looks like in 3D. So it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure we're getting people cycling through different aspects of the industry as well.